Well, the question is, who am I? How did I get here? That's a long story. So I'm the CEO and the founder of Fantasy Flight Games, which I founded about 20 years ago today. Not today, I think the 22nd of June will have been 20 years ago since we started the company. Fantasy Flight originally started as a company where I wanted to republish French-Belgian comics into the United States. It was called Fantasy Flight Publishing. We had some rights to some fantastic books, some Franco-Belgian books like Lucky Luke and Spirou. We tried to publish them in the U.S. I graduated from college in the Midwest of the U.S. and tried to make that work, started the business. Unfortunately, the American comic tastes or graphic novel tastes at the time did not quite agree with my business model to bring in these. And so things did not go terribly well. But in the course of making these comics, graphic novels, I learned how to do print publishing, which working with Photoshop, working with Quark Express, working with layout programs, working with color separation and plates and manufacturing and gluing and stitching and binding, all these different things. And so I was like, well, there wasn't really that big of a leap from doing that to games. There turned out to be, but I thought maybe it was a short leap. Another big impact was that in the U.S., the type of stores that carry comics, and this is generally true in Europe as well, a lot of comic stores in the U.S. will have a large section of games. Some of them may even be primarily games and also carry comics. And so the distribution and information for which you try to sell comics was fairly so close and similar to games. And I was able to get in contact with a lot of the game distributors because they were advertising in the comic book store, trade magazines and so on. And so, having almost basically gone out of business, not quite just hanging on with by inches of our lives to the business staying open, I convinced our other partners in the company that we should try to make a game. And I had a game in mind. It was called Twilight Imperium, and it was basically this big, epic space conquest and empire building political game. Why that game? Because that's a game I wanted to play that wasn't out there at the time. And so, hey, let's do this. And we did. And all the comic books were very sad when they saw all the games starting to actually sell. And they were just sitting in their brown boxes. And so we pretty quickly decided that the way forward was to push into games. And of course, I was delighted because inherently I was a gamer. I had growing up, I played every type of game imaginable: D&D, Avalon Hill board games. I had played Magic a couple of years prior to that. I played miniatures games, Games Workshop, 40K, and Warhammer. So I was basically. I basically grew up with games, so this was really delightful to me that what I really inherently loved was actually the better business than what I thought it was going to be the better one. So we moved into that, we've then struggled and fallen and leaped and jumped and crawled and stuff through decades really to where we are today. There's a lot. There's inherent challenges that come from running a business, having to have inventories, having to, finance product development, building a foundational stable of products that can pay your, living salary for even one or two people was very challenging early on. One of the challenging things about the gaming hobby, and really what also is it's exciting about it, is that it's so forward driven. You're always trying to look for new innovations, pushing yourself, making everything better, learning from your mistakes, pushing forward. There's not a lot of relying on the past. Even today with FFG, I would say about 60% of our business is new product driven. Which means that inherently to be healthy we have to be better next year than we are this year, have better ideas, try to push what we do, always push improvements, always listen to people. I don't know if that answers your question, but there are so many challenges, and we've been very, very fortunate and lucky to have had the correct product and maybe the correct decisions at times to overcome the worst ones. There's a couple of very important products that are important to mention. But we started doing board games and card games in '97, and that was a tremendous struggle that almost took us out of business 2 or 3 times until we released a product named Disc Wars, which is a very innovative, interesting sort of hybrid miniatures flat game, and that really was successful, and it really showed us that we do something special and unique, you can be rewarded for it. And so that brought us out of our near-death state, which we still were suffering from, but comic books sucked most of the equity out of the company. And so that kind of brought us back to sort of a stable footing. Then there's a few things that happened that really helped us understand the business better. One, of course, was getting the Lord of the Rings board game back in about 2000. I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan, so this was just an honor to me to be able to be even associated with that brand. With that, and the way that was produced, and what we learned from games like Disc Wars and getting into role-playing, was to try to slowly start to understand what type of games we wanted to make were. And in 2003, now being reasonably healthy, we put out the Game of Thrones board game, which is a game I designed, and I sort of felt I had kind of discovered that right mix of narrative, of complexity, of quality of components, taking certain Euro-style philosophies, putting them into a game, but trying to keep that sense of narrative, that sense of danger, that sense of being alive with the other players, and also pushing for what I really believe in a lot is in as much simultaneous and interlaced actions as you can in a game. Before that time, a lot of games had an aspect to them where you take your turn, you go through 8 phases, and I sit here and wait for you to be done with your phases, then I take my turn, I take my 8 phases, and so on. And back then, it was not as common as it is now. What you try to do is you try to get players more and more engaged in the experience at all times. So that the whole idea, like, okay, you're taking a turn, I'm going to go have buy a pizza across the street now, is no longer really viable. That's too bad for the pizza place, but it's much better for the game experience. You're feeling always involved, and so those are the type of experience that I really try to push. Interlace the turns, try to create simultaneous experiences, and beyond all, I think what FFG really wants is to, when we're successful, is when you play a game, doesn't matter how long it takes, when you stand up and you walk away, you feel like you had a story. You felt that you should have talked like a stormtrooper or a monster or something, and you really had this kind of almost role-playing engagement with the narrative that happened in the game. And when you walked away from it, that you felt that you could write a small novel, or you want to go tell somebody about that journey that you had within the confines of the game. And when we achieve that we achieve really then what we want. That's our vision for games. And so the Game of Thrones, I think, sort of set that I felt was the right balance of narrative, of art, of conflict, of mechanics and engagement, and it really kind of helped us guide us to where we wanted to be. And then in 2005 was a big year for us because we released Twilight Imperium 3rd edition, which is of course an iteration of the Twilight Imperium saga that had happened in prior. But we actually put it out in a box that was about $80, this huge box. Because the idea was that we didn't feel that price was that important to gamers. We felt that the experience and the level of quality was important to gamers, and that price was not as important as the impact. Because at the time, an $80 big board game box was considered to be heresy. It was considered to be outrageous and impossible. We had distributors calling us up and saying, a game of that size, they didn't know how to pack it. They didn't have boxes that fit it. And so, wow, we said, no, we believe this is the right experience, the right impact for the player. So then we reached, we had really tried to find a format that really fit us. And with Game of Thrones, I sort of felt that really, to me, had the balance of component quality, of gameplay, the duration, time, and balance, and engagement, of narrative engagement and conflict, and so on. And that really set a blueprint for me for how to teach my colleagues and other designers inside FFG. At that time, we were maybe 15 people, to really say these are the type of games we want to make. And that then influenced, of course, also the design on Twilight Imperium 3rd edition. And then about a year and a half later, 2005 rolled around, and this was probably one of the most important formative years in our history. First, we put out Twilight Imperium, which we put out in this ginormous box. It was $80. At the time, an $80 game, and a game of that size, was considered to be heresy. It was considered to be impossible and could not work. But it really did. We faced a lot of resistance, but the idea that the value of what you get and the experience of what you get is more important than necessarily the price point is a huge unlocking mechanism for not only allowing us to make games of extraordinary vision and scope, but everyone else as well. As soon as one player is able to unlock that door, all suddenly that enables other designers, other publishers, and so on to raise their ambition, raise their sense of scale and componentry, raise maybe the amount of time they can spend on a game to a whole other level. And I think the idea that we now are paying for games that do have some, they're not cheap anymore. We're talking about 60, 70, 40, 80 pounds for games. Has been a really important movement because it has really allowed us to unlock value, and I think it's worth every penny that those games cost. But prior to that, there was kind of a forbidden zone. In 2005, I was able to break that wall down more than any other year that I know, and that same earlier, I think we released Twilight Imperium 3rd Edition in January, and that March we released Arkham Horror, and then that fall we released Descent: Journeys in the Dark. And a month later, we released a World of Warcraft board game. So this year was a year where we really found our roots in making big, elaborate games for the computer game industry. We developed two of our biggest personal or proprietary brands in Arkham Horror and Descent and Twilight Imperium, and it really set. I think it gave the audience really a taste and a scope for what FFG wanted to be. So that year was really critical, and probably the year where people outside and inside FFG kind of understood where we were going. But it did come back from that Game of Thrones board game in 2003 that really set that blueprint, and then it took us about a year and a half to really engage it in a kind of a more of a bigger canvas. I think maybe that that perception is more of a perception from the outside than maybe through our history. We released our first collectible card game, which is the Game of Thrones collectible card game, back in, I believe, 2001. So we have been engaged in the idea of games that are expandable, games that have competition and community and have a living kind of organism, meta play evolving, has been going on since '99 when we released Discourse. So we never disengaged from that. There were just other parts of the business that maybe were more luminary at the time. We released a game called Twilight Imperium Armada, which was a disc-flipping miniatures game. And they're basically, there are aspects of this which you can still find today in Star Wars Armada or X-Wing, experiences that we had and lessons that were learned from those kind of games. So in terms of being engaged in miniatures games, I think back then we just couldn't afford to put out a game with pre-painted plastic ships, even though we would have loved to, but that wasn't where we were at the time. And so the capability that we have, having grown over the years, have just allowed us to paint in such a much broader canvas and to do things that we could only have dreamt of in the past. Living card games evolved really out of the trading card games that we were doing. We've always been fairly diverse. We've had card games and trading card games, we've had board games, we had role-playing games, and then a variety of gaming accessories. We also produce card sleeves and board game sleeves and dice and other things as a business. The living card games really evolved out of the struggles that the TCG category was going in the early to middle last decade. TCGs are very challenging. They're very expensive to make. They require a certain minimum fan base to really make sense, and they really did not work internationally. We've always been a very international company, and selling a TCG in Germany or in France or in Spain was almost impossible. In the US there's room for a few, but the way that TCGs work, the way that you inherently engage with them as a customer, it has evolved a little bit now with the very prevalent online single sales, but there was for a long time, about 2 or 3 times a year, you'd get a new release, and everybody would basically binge purchase. You would buy hundreds of pounds, hundreds of dollars of stuff, and you open up your packs, and oh, it's so exciting, and then you sit there, and there's a giant stack of cards, a whole bin full of detritus of whatever you did, and you feel guilty. You feel like, oh, what did I just do? You have this sort of remorse. I don't think you should have remorse after you buy a game. You should feel awesome. And there's a lot of good things about TCGs as well. There's things you can do with them. There's a type of excitement and engagement that you can't have otherwise. But there was a lot of people who kind of felt this level, I can't do this anymore. After spending £300 or £400 on a big release, saying, that's it, I can't do it, I feel too guilty, I got to move on. It's an addiction, or it's just a road that I've taken and I have to reverse. But we love the type of games. We love the evolutionary, the competitive, the games that have a constant flux, in the meta game and constantly feel like they're evolving. And so to save Game of Thrones, the TCG at the time, which really was becoming not sustainable, we decided I came up with this new concept with the living card game. Inherently, that's not a very original idea, because it's a base game with a bunch of expansions, right? But there was a lot of thinking behind this, that we have a core set that would be at a reasonable price and would be a complete experience buying a single core set to anybody. Like any board game or any card game, you'd buy it and you'd be able to have a lot of value out of a single core set play. Now, if you were the type of person that wanted the living, ongoing experience, that engagement, moving forward, which also requires a lot of R&D and a lot of maintenance from us, well, then these games would allow you to do that. But the amount of money that in terms of you would spend to have that experience, now that means that whereas before you could really probably only afford to play one, now you could maybe afford to play two or three of them. So that means that when you go into a game store and you're ready to play a game, if you have other people that know how to play 2 or 3 games, you are exponentially more likely to find another player. Whereas before, when you only play one game, you are very unlikely to find another player unless everybody plays only that one game. Which is why retail shops were starting to narrow their selection to just 1 or 2, maybe 3 TCGs, because doing a wider variety would split their audiences and actually create, this kind of atrophy among their player base. What that meant, though, is that the selection in game stores was narrow, and a lot of other people coming from the outside maybe weren't as attracted to that narrow selection. And so the idea of LCGs was to really expand experiences and create more of a diverse experience in games, which means that you could play more different games, and it means that now the retailers could offer a wider assortment and a broader selection of those games, which should, in theory, appeal to a wider selection of people, which makes more gamers, which expands our hobby. Okay, there's a lot of we've delivered about, I think, 4 or 5 key points to why LCGs are just a great thing. And so that's how they evolved. And then the miniatures games, and we've always done various kind of miniatures games, some more successful than others. And we, of course, with X-Wing especially, have really caught on to something exceptional that we're very proud of, and we're very humbled by. And every day I know we work very, very hard to create the best possible new product for that game that we can in the most measured and sensible way. Well, I think maybe, so the question is, it seems that lately FFG has gotten better or more ambitious in the notion of supporting games and creating tournaments, creating official events, and so on. We've always tried to do that. I'm not sure that we ever had, before Netrunner and X-Wing came along, that we maybe had the critical mass that allowed us to create an infrastructure internally at FFG that could support that in as meaningful of a way as we maybe have wanted. But now with those 2 games creating that sort of core of thousands and thousands of players becoming engaged in the games, we could put an infrastructure into FFG that allowed us to provide more support in that sense. We had actually for many years, I think since 2008 or 9, done all sorts of events. We had the Arkham Knights event at our local game center, but it wasn't until maybe 2012 when X-Wing and Netrunner came along that we were able to take some of the experiences that we had in the past and really put enough resources into them to really make them go. Another important factor was allowing our distributors to offer our game night and support kits as opposed to requiring them to be sent directly out, which really allowed retailers much more access to them and an easier, more elegant way for them to get that support. And then that's done phenomenal. I mean, last year we sold or shipped over 25,000 OP kits, and that is a lot of organized play. That is a lot of gaming all over the world. Well, we want to do better. We always want to do better. One thing that we're missing, that we have been missing, for example, is a software that will allow tournament organizers to better administer large tournaments. I mean, right now, we're humbled by the 160 people Netrunner tournament taking place in a tent right down here. We're in a hotel right now, and I'm looking out of a window, and there's a big, huge white tent. and it is full of X-Wing, and that can be complicated to run. It's not an easy thing, and so we have been developing software to help tournament organizers administer that. A game like Netrunner is particularly tricky because you actually are playing two separate decks, two asymmetrical games, and having software that can handle that in the proper way wasn't necessarily existing all that easily before, and so we've invested into ways to allow for better experiences for the TOs, which I hope then will move on to a better experience for the actual players playing in the tournaments and in the events. We are also going to try to do more online with hooking up people with other players, with trying to advertise local events better. So there's a number of initiatives that we're trying to do to make it better. Yeah, sure. We have no plans right now to have any rotation for X-Wing, and I don't even think it's been discussed. You know, unlike a living card game where we have 200, 250 new cards coming out every year, and for every card you have to try to triangulate what it does with so many other interactions, and that becomes increasingly impossible to do when you have a card pool above, we think about 2,000 cards, then that is an issue. For X-Wing, we are so deliberate, and the release schedule is, compared to an LCG, is relatively slow, that we don't have any ambition right now to create any form of rotation. I mean, what are we going to do, rotate the X-Wing out of X-Wing? I mean, that would be very difficult for us to do, right? So there's no plans for that right now. That said, our philosophy is that we sometimes will take hard decisions if that's what's best for the games, whether it's releasing a complete reboot or a new edition of the AGOT, or Game of Thrones LCG, which was a very difficult decision to make, but it's going to be great for the game. We will make those decisions if we have to be brave and make decisions that are hard, that may seem disappointing as an existing player, being used to a certain environment, having a certain product. If we have to come out and say, hey, for the good of the game, we have to make some changes, it is our responsibility to do that. We'll be accountable for that, you know, and we'll take the lumps if we have to, but we do it with the intent that a game should survive for decades, not for years. I love Lord of the Rings. I mean, Lord of the Rings to me is probably the number one reason why I'm here today. That maybe in discovering D&D when I was 12. I love Lord of the Rings, and I'm very, very proud of the Lord of the Rings living card game and the other games that we have. It's probably true that I may be more involved personally in the Lord of the Rings the living card game than most or many of the other LCGs in particular. I do think that that was particularly involved in the early stages, the early few cycles, and trying to create something that was really authentic to Lord of the Rings, and trying not to get too fantastical and to think about when we create something in Middle-earth that it has to be something that is rooted in that same kind of philosophy and concept that maybe Tolkien and resources that Tolkien himself would have drawn from, so it feels authentic. When you do a game like that, you have to invent things. You have to put places and characters and creatures and storylines into a world that is so well loved and so established that it can easily go wrong if you don't have that sense of that right texture, that right philosophy. And so I've been involved quite a bit in that scope and scale, trying not to fall to the temptation of just doing easy, fantasy tropes and just throwing them in there. Like magic, for example, in Lord of the Rings, is actually extremely rare and not terribly powerful. I mean, the most powerful thing Gandalf, the greatest sorcerer of all time, did was like light a fire, at least overtly. But it really was his mechanisms and schemes and his influence through people and through events and a higher magic. And essentially, that was important to Lord of the Rings. One example is the wildlings, not the wildlings. Sorry, the wild men that live just to the west of Isengard. We know about them, we hear about them, but there's not a whole lot said about them. So we wanted to explore them a little more, and then what we tried to do is find a concept that Tolkien himself probably would have felt was the right context for these, such as these were probably inspired by the Britons and the Welsh, whereas the whereas the Saxons and the Normans would sort of feel these were the wild men from the hills to the west. And so when we had to delve more into their background, their history, and what maybe made them tick, we tried to take inspirations. We took the liberty of assuming that that was the case, and we felt that that could be at least authentic, and we tried to be respectful, of the property, in a way that we felt would have been accepted by a person like Tolkien himself. We could of course be wrong, but at least we do want to take that extra step to try to be that thoughtful about it. I will say that my engagement with Lord of the Rings is a lot less now than it has been, and the people that are running it, Caleb and Matt, are doing a great job. I'm a big fan of that game. I really love it, and I hope if you haven't tried it that you'll try it too. How it's evolved? Well, it's. I saw you interview Eric before, right? He's saying, "Wow, it's really gone a long way." From 1997, putting out Twilight Imperium as like maybe there were a total of maybe 4 or 5 board game releases the entire year, to going to 5,000 a year, where we're at now, right? I mean, it's obviously huge, and it's not like it's coming from nowhere. The games that are delivered today, whether they be card or board or role-playing, are unbelievably great games in how well considered they are, how many lessons have been learned from the past, how beautiful that they've become, how our standards for artwork and quality have evolved, and as we are pushed to do better year after year, we do better, and more people from the rest of the world, the non-gamers. I mean, a non-gamer is somebody waiting to be a gamer. Will soon, hopefully, have an attraction to that, and that's why we've seen so many people enter our industry with delight, because there's great stuff to be had. There's great experiences here. A lot of people ask me, wouldn't computer games have killed off board games a long time ago? We were like, well, of course not. I mean, the experience of deliver are so different. We've seen the computer game industry go up, right? But we are going up as well. They're not mutually exclusive. And in fact, some of our best customers are people who work at computer game companies. They love coding computer games and having a professional engagement with that. But then when they go home at night, they want to play games from us and and other publishers. It is obviously a important topic for us. It's a great thing for in many ways. And it is something that I hope will push our industry to be better, and all these ideas coming in and being rewarded may make things just going to be a better place for us. We're better for having it than not having it. It does create some disruptions to the retail. It does create some disruptions to the established business practices of publishers. And so we're careful looking at what it is that Kickstarter is contributing, and whether we want to engage with that in any way. I do not have an answer right now to what are our plans, but certainly having FFG contributing Kickstarter the same way as Cool Mini, that's not really in something that we think is appropriate. At the same time, Cool Mini is able to go out and sell these things directly, and be able to have some advantages in the business model we do not have. And they're able to put it into retail and to distribution just like us. So they're not really being punished in the marketplace for actually taking this approach. So we have to wonder what kind of balance do we need to take in this, and that's something that we're evaluating on an ongoing basis. Awesomeness, pure awesomeness. Well, we're gonna keep going. We have a lot of really fun stuff in the works. Of course, when we have games that are as popular as a Netrunner or an X-Wing, we have to take those very, very seriously and put a lot of resources and energy into making those as best as they can be. We are investing, however, in new things and new concepts. We have a lot of new games coming out. And I think one thing that you should look for us, hopefully for some leadership in, is trying to really push the boundary as what can you do with digital augmentation, like using digital devices that will help you have an even greater board game experience. I drew a curve once that showed augmentation in board games. If you do it, it's not very meaningful to the board game. Then you have it more or less as a gimmick. If you do it in a way where it overtakes the game, or it's super influential on the game, then you have a computer game. Why do I have cards? I should have it all on the app. There's a middle ground, I think, that can allow us to offload fiddly, complex sides of a board game and really make the board game experience so much more accessible and so much more surprising and exciting than using some of the technology, basically being cards or sand timers or whatever that we have now. It's a thing we're having under exploration, but we have several projects going on right now, and I'm very excited about what we're going to be able to do in that hemisphere. There seems to be a lot of parts of that question. First of all, I mean, why do it? Why have FFG merged with an organization like Asmodee? A lot of reasons. One of the things that when you are an independent publisher entity, you do have to have a significant responsibility to your shareholders and to your staff to create a vibrant and growing environment, and one that's not going to be dangerous or unstable. And when you reach the level that FFG has, we have to start being concerned about what are the other legs in our stool. And so we have to think about, we may be making some family games, maybe making other games, because about 60% of our business every year is new games. We guess right most of the time, but there may be years where we don't. I mean, we're all human. We can guess right and wrong, and while we've been lucky to have guessed right 9 out of 10 times, maybe one year we'll guess 3 out of 10. What happens then? So there's a sense of diversification and overall broad responsibility for growth and stability for your company that needs to be taken into consideration when you have an organization. And so we would have games like, Hey, That's My Fish, or Ingenious, or other games like that, which doesn't really seem or smell or feel like an FFG game. Even though what we're best at are these ambitious, big, expandable, immersive, complex, even long games. So there are games that are family, short, 10-minute games with penguins. How does this blend? Well, it blends in the sense that we have to try to explore multiple avenues of business for us to create some level of diversification and risk aversion. When you join a group, not only do you have a lot of resources we can contribute to Asmodee in terms of some of the technology and philosophy and practices that we have, systems we developed in-house. We have our internal database tools team, where we have a lot of things that we do that on a very kind of behind-the-scenes structural level could be very important to both organizations. But Asmodee has a lot of things to contribute to us. One of the things that they have some great publishing relationships and publishing arms where we can say, hey, well, let's really be FFG. Let's take some of the games, like Hey, That's My Fish as an example, which is doing great for us, but maybe as a partnership with Asmodee could do even better. Maybe there are games on the Asmodee side which are really FFG style games that we could maybe adopt and really try to bring to a whole new level, using all the tools and manufacturing and passion that we have for those type of games. So we can really, for FFG as a studio, we can now become even more identifiable what we do best. Okay, and we can have the sort of the a little more rest on a global level, that we have a lot of supporting infrastructure around the world, that when we make a game, that we can now trust that it will be supported and scaled across the world. That was not always the case. When you make a game, you have to have people willing to publish and distribute and translate and internationalize, and there's a lot of competition. So this is one way for us to be more secure in doing what we do best. And also, of course, trying to contribute a lot to Asmodee. The way that it works is that the companies merge, which really means that that Asmodee has more or less acquired FFG, but I have taken a significant portion of that and reinvested into Asmodee, so I am now a substantial shareholder in Asmodee, and so that is where we have a merger. I've also had shareholders that stuck with me for 20 years through Lucky Luke and Twilight Imperium and Discourse, and 2 decades of sticking with me, that they had a chance to escape this little business that was FFG, and allow me to sort of explore the business in a whole new way. So we're very excited about it.